So my name is David Lee. I'm Senior Vice President at Bank of America and the West Michigan team lead here in Grand Rapids, and a member of the Board of Directors of the World Affairs Council, so welcome once again. Thank you for being here today and sharing your time to welcome home Ambassador Brink, as together we celebrate West Michigan's legacy of global engagement. As you heard Christina mention, the World Affairs Council of West Michigan is 75 years old this year, an amazing accomplishment. It's fitting to share this birthday with NATO, one of the foundational American-led global collaboratives after World War II, an organization I'm sure we're going to hear more about through the discussion and Q&A from Ambassador Brink. 75 years ago, in 1949, two Grand Rapidians, Judge Douglas Hillman and Mr. Edgar Orr, founded the council to provide individuals, educators, and business leaders a space to give and receive ideas and information about West Michigan's engagement with other nations, 75 years ago. They were inspired by another great Grand Rapids native, Senator Arthur Vandenberg, who also was very much at the forefront of many important initiatives, the NATO beginnings, the United Nations, and the Marshall Plan. Our annual prize for excellence is global diplomacy bears Senator Vandenberg's name. For 75 years, the motto of our World Affairs Council has been evident in our programs, and I think our board members know this well, right? Which is, to change the world, we believe we must first know the world. So with your help, we aim to continue this for another 75 years. Each year, we do recognize the founding of the World Affairs Council of Western Michigan with the announcement of the Hillman Orr Award, given to a local individual who has exemplified the purpose of the council. Past recipients have been Bridget Close of the Right Place, the late Ambassador Peter Secchia, businessman and activist Bing Goy, and World Trade Week co-directors Kendra Kuo and Sonia Johnson. I think Sonia's here today amongst us. This year, our Hillman Award recipient cannot attend today. I think that's a first, if I'm not mistaken, but she's recovering from surgery. So she's not here today, but her achievement make her the most significant, perhaps the most significant individual in the 75-year history of the World Affairs Council of Western Michigan. And speaking, of course, of Dixie Anderson, business owner turned community shaper, executive director of the organization for 22 years, its first ever paid employee, and the person who set the tone for the council to empower the people of West Michigan to engage thoughtfully with the world. I'm going to read you a couple of facts about Bridget's time. Under her watch, the council grew from an all-volunteer cadre to a formidable army, interacting with world leaders and putting Grand Rapids on the map as a global influencer. During her tenure, individuals and world leaders such as South African Bishop Desmond Tutu, U.S. President George W. Bush, Pakistani President Pervez Musharraf, and other world changers made their way to our community. It's truly amazing. Partnering with the Foreign Policy Association in New York, she grew the 8-week Great Decision Series, already one of FPA's oldest affiliates, dating to the mid-1950s, into one of the country's best known and admired global discussion programs. The FBA gave this council an award and recognition for excellence during Dixie's time as executive director. Dixie also served on the National World Affairs Council of America as a board member. Through it all, she has been collaborative, creative, convinced that West Michigans deserved a more prominent spot on the world stage in the tradition of Arthur Vandenberg, Judge Hillman, and Mr. Edgar Orr. They're just a handful of people that can be immediately known just by one name. I think, we all know the entertainment side of Bono, Madonna, and Pele, Cher. I'm from Chicago, so Michael, right? Michael. In our community, Dixie has that same level of recognition. But let's give her a round of applause for the Hillman Orr Award. Now I'd like to welcome Hank Meyer to the podium to present the 2024 Vandenberg Award.
Thank you, David, and welcome everyone. Really would like to congratulate Dixie and kudos to the World Affairs Council for 75 years of global programming, and here's to 75 more. It's been an outstanding record of engagement and involvement. We've been talking about West Michiganders whose actions have made a difference around the globe and brought a deeper understanding of how important it is for West Michigan to be engaged in the world. Arthur Vandenberg, Hillman, and Orr, Dixie Anderson are all examples of this. Today, we have the honor of welcoming home someone who decided to use her gifts to make the world more understandable, safe, and connected. We're delighted to present the 2024 Vandenberg Prize to Bridget Brink, graduate of East Grand Rapids High School and the current U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine. Senator Vandenberg, were he with us today, would be grinning from ear to ear as someone who fought for the values that Ambassador Brink is working with the Ukrainian people today. Ambassador Brink was nominated by President Biden to be U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine in April 2022, confirmed unanimously by the United States Senate a month later, and arrived in Kiev a couple of weeks after that. A career member of the Senior Foreign Service, Ambassador Brink served as U.S. Ambassador to the Slovak Republic from August 2019 until her confirmation as Ambassador to Ukraine. She previously served as Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs at the Department of State and served as Deputy Chief of Mission at U.S. embassies in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, and in Tbilisi, Georgia. During her 28 years in the Foreign Service, Ambassador Brink has spent most of her career advancing U.S. policy in Europe and Eurasia. She worked in the Aegean and the South Caucasus regions at the National Security Council and served in the State Department as Deputy Director for Southern European Affairs and Cyprus Desk Officer. She began her career in Belgrade, Serbia. Ambassador Brink grew up in East Grand Rapids and Spring Lake before that and received her bachelor's degree in political science from Kenyon College. She holds a master's degree in international relations and political theory from the London School of Economics, speaks Russian, and has studied Georgian, Serbian, and French. And we are glad that her husband, Nick, has also been able to join us today. In the tradition of Senator Vandenberg, another Grand Rapidian, patron saint of the World Affairs Council, as was described earlier, and with the global vision of our own President Gerald R. Ford, we are delighted to present the 2024 Vandenberg Prize to Ambassador Bridget Brink.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Good afternoon. Christina, first of all, I want to say thank you for your opening remarks, and to all of you, the members and the leaders of the World Affairs Council of Western Michigan. Thank you for warmly welcoming me here. It's a 36-hour journey from Kyiv involving trains, planes, and automobiles, so I can say it's really great to be home. All the more so because I'm here with my husband, Nick, and our son, Jack, and our son, Cole, is also on his way back home. I want to say thank you to Hank for that very warm welcome and overkind introduction. I remember that we joked when I met you earlier this year at the Ford School at the University of Michigan that Meyer is a fixture of my childhood, and Meyer Gardens, I love this place, was where my husband and I would bring our toddler sons, including Jack, back here for space to run around when we'd come back from overseas. So I just want to say thank you to you and your family for all you have done to build this community. I also want to thank the World Affairs Council President Matthew Hughes for joining us from DC. I understand there are 90 World Affairs Councils in the United States, and it's a great honor to have you here today. Thank you. I wanted to recognize, and I'm sorry, I'm going to recognize a lot of people because I'm back home, so I hope you'll forgive me. But I want to recognize Michael, Erica, and Rachel from the World Affairs Council of Western Michigan for their extraordinary efforts to make this event possible. And finally, I want to echo Hank and other colleagues to say, congratulations on the 75th anniversary of this renowned organization, 3/4 of a century of bringing the world to West Michigan. And I'm so honored to share this afternoon with Hillman Orr awardee Dixie Anderson. Well, I'm deeply proud to represent our nation overseas. Our ability to defend our national interests depends on support from people at home, from people like Dixie, who show that we're stronger when we're connected to global issues that impact us. And in this vein, I want to recognize colleagues from the Gerald R. Ford Museum Foundation, which together with institutions like Aquinas College, Calvin University, Ferris State University, and Davenport University seek to inform and educate our future generations. I have always been proud of being from the same city as President Ford, known for his decency, integrity, and personal courage. And I'm a strong advocate for education as the key to helping us all work through the challenges of today and tomorrow. And I appreciate the business representatives here today, Meyer, Amway, and Bank of America as sponsors, and others represented as supporters of the World Affairs Council, all of whom have given so much to this community. And I couldn't be prouder to be back in my hometown to join a dialogue that, at its very core, is about what Arthur Vandenberg stood for, the vital importance of U.S. engagement with the world. Thanks to our elected leaders, U.S. Representative Scholten, Michigan State Senator Huizenga, and Michigan State Representative Glanville for being here today. And also to the consuls from Canada and Belgium. Thank you for being our valued partners in global security. As I drove to my childhood home, I was quickly reminded by everybody's front yards that we have an election coming up. There's nothing like election season in the United States. But for those who want a break from the attention that a swing state brings, I have some good news. The Hatch Act prohibits me from talking about domestic politics. So I will gladly follow the advice of Arthur Vandenberg, who said that politics should stop at the water's edge. There could not be a more apt moment to consider the importance of engaging the world than this one. We face not one, but two major global crises in Ukraine and in the Middle East that have the potential to affect the prosperity and security of the United States for decades to come. We've faced such a moment before, and it was a single person from this very hometown who helped shape the course of history following the massive destruction of World War II by forging bipartisan support for the Marshall Plan that rebuilt Europe and for the creation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which became and remains the most powerful security alliance in the world, and that has ushered in 75 years of peace and prosperity. This, of course, is Arthur Vandenberg, who did so much to support a peaceful and prosperous Europe and America and the wider global community. And now we face the biggest threat to peace in Europe since World War II, with Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine. This war is not just Russia's war. Russia is fighting with Iranian drones, North Korean missiles, and Chinese know-how against a democratic nation that is fighting and dying to join the Euro-Atlantic institutions that our forefathers built. Russia's decision to invade a country of 40 million people in the heart of Europe has already had devastating impact. Tens of thousands of people, including 600 children, have been killed. Almost $500 billion of destruction. And millions of men, women, and children have been displaced from their homes. How we respond to this naked aggression has an impact that will go well beyond the borders of Europe. And the lesson of Senator Arthur Vandenberg or of former President Jerry Ford, is that individuals can make a critical difference in shaping the events of the world. Individuals can and will affect how this terrible and illegal war ends and what it will mean to our own peace and security. This idea of knowing the world, as the World Affairs Council so rightly promotes, and acting in accordance to our interests and our values is the heart of what we try to do as America's diplomats around the world. This is what and who we are as Americans, a country that protects and defends freedom, democracy, and human rights around the globe. And we do so because it is both the right thing to do and because it is in our vital national interest to shape the world in a way that respects these fundamental principles. It's my great honor to be from this community, to follow in the footsteps of so many before me, and to lift up those who will follow, to secure the future we all want and need, a strong America that leads with its values and rallies other nations in support of democratic principles and institutions. This is the road that Arthur Vandenberg traveled, from being a staunch isolationist to a courageous Euro-Atlanticist whose belief in what could be paved the way for what is today and what we must continue to defend for tomorrow. So I am humbled and honored to receive this prize today. Thank you, and I very much look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Madam Ambassador, and we'll try not to impose the Hatch Act restrictions on you here, but tempting as it would be. Congratulations on this honor, and thank you for a distinguished career in diplomatic excellence. Now, you were raised and schooled here, so I have to ask, what events and people might have inspired you earlier in your life to take the career journey that you've embarked upon?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Hank, and thanks again for just this wonderful chance to get together and for your hosting me. I think you might laugh, and I've said it before, but when I was a kid, I was incredibly proud to drive in and out of East Grand Rapids, for those of you who are from East Grand Rapids, and to see the sign that says, this is the home of the 38th President of the United States. And I remember that from quite a young age. And I think, although I didn't really know what exactly that meant, I knew it was something to be proud of. And I think the one thing that I recall of my own hometown community is that sign. It's changed a little. There's now a new sign. It used to be a bit longer sign, but that's what I remember as a child. And I think it was just an inspiration of public service. But also my family history is one where our family lore is my grandfather actually served as a doctor in World War II. And he, a couple of times, treated Eisenhower, General Eisenhower. And the story of him treating General Eisenhower, who happened to have high blood pressure, and the family lore story that has been passed down generation to generation is just that my grandfather basically found his blood pressure was very high, and it was going to prevent him from getting a very important promotion. And so my grandfather said, you know, sir, well, first of all, what he told the family is that I wasn't stupid. I wasn't going to flunk the general in his physical examination. Yeah, but that he said that he told them to lie down, think happy thoughts, and I'll come back in 20 minutes. Yeah. So I told that story at my first time becoming ambassador to the Slovak Republic, and someone came up to me later and said, actually, I've done the history on General Eisenhower, and your grandfather has put it a bit mildly, because in fact, General Eisenhower was given 3 weeks of bed rest before he was allowed to get his physical done and then go back into the war. But in any case, he of course became the first Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, and then of course then became president. And so I think in my family, this idea of service is one that is held in very high esteem. And so it was quite easy for me to follow in those footsteps.
Well, and that service has taken you to some interesting posts. In fact, to many of us, some exotic posts from Cyprus to Serbia to Uzbekistan and Georgia. What were some of your more challenging assignments and what made them so?
Yes, this is a good question. They're all, we like to say as diplomats, something's interesting. So whenever a diplomat says something's interesting, it means that was quite a challenge. So I've had the great, I'd say, fortune to have some interesting assignments. I would say my first assignment was probably one of the toughest, and it was because I started in the 1990s, and I started in the Balkans, in Serbia and Belgrade. And this was in the middle of the Balkan Wars. At that time, the war was actually happening in Bosnia. And so actually my mother would call and say, I'm very worried about you. What's happening there? And I would say, it's okay, Mom, the war's in Bosnia, it's not in Serbia. And it wasn't too much longer before the war then came to Serbia and happened to come in the place where I was working. And part of my duties were to cover events in Kosovo. And at that time, there were some serious atrocities that were happening, committed by Serbs in Kosovo, and I was responsible for reporting on those things. It was a very difficult experience as a 20-something to actually go from learning about world events, including bad things that happen, to seeing them. I know you're also a reporter by background, and to see them at a young age is quite, I'd say, shocking and difficult. And at that moment and in that particular job, I was in my first tour, so I had like a brand new minted diplomat. And they were asking me to do things that I had like read about, but I really didn't know anything about it. And I think it was a very difficult experience for me to process that. And I can, without being too graphic, as we're all eating lunch, but to have people who are left dead on their front lawns and mutilated, and then their houses completely destroyed, the taps broken off so that the water destroys everything, their cars completely demolished. And that's the kind of thing that was happening in that part of the world at that time. What led me to believe very deeply a couple of things. One, it's really important that we acknowledge what's happening in these parts of the world and what is at stake. And two, that America helps lead us through it. And so at that time, I also had the chance to work with some legendary diplomats. Richard Holbrooke, who is widely believed to be one of the most smartest and best diplomats that we have had in our system. But also with Secretary Albright. At the time, she was Secretary of State, and others. And so it also showed me how you could use American power and American leverage in a way to stop wars, to stop killing, to do the right thing. And I think these were really two important lessons. So fast forward to today, this by far is the hardest assignment I could have ever imagined or dreamed of. But I see it as also a huge privilege because the stakes are very high. They're very high for Ukraine, obviously, because Ukraine faces the risk of being annihilated as a country. But they're also very high for Europe, and I believe very high for us. So despite the fact I have had some interesting assignments, I think that has been part of what has helped me in this particular assignment.
Well, and clearly you're thrown into the middle of something now, and I think we all grieve for what's happening in that very beleaguered country that where you're serving. But what's your assessment of the situation? Were you surprised when the invasion occurred?
I was not surprised when the invasion occurred. We were not surprised in government. First of all, we had advanced intelligence that we then shared publicly and shared with our allies and our partners and the Ukrainians to say that we believed that the buildup of forces that Russia had done on the border of Ukraine was actually not an exercise. Just to remind everyone, that's what Putin said he was doing, an exercise, but that it was a preparation for a full-scale invasion. So in that case, I wasn't surprised. And we knew, and I was, at the time, I was in a different job, and I informed the foreign minister of the Slovak Republic that this is our intelligence and we want to work together to prepare. But also, I wasn't surprised because it's absolutely Putin's playbook. I served in Georgia for 2 tours, including right in the lead up of Russia's invasion of South Ossetia in Georgia. So I was not surprised that Russia, after invading Georgia in 2008, in the summer of 2008, and then invading Crimea, part of Ukraine, in 2014, and also attempting to take eastern Ukraine in 2014, that now in 2022, or then in 2022, Russia decided to launch a full-scale invasion in Ukraine.
Well, and so much of it as we learn about the war and the conflict, we hear so much about the 2 protagonists, Putin, of course, and Vladimir Zelensky. What's your assessment of the protagonists, if I may ask?
So for Putin, I think I should let my counterpart in Moscow, my friend Lynn Tracy, who's the US ambassador there, to assess Vladimir Putin, or just you can look at what he does, which is a good way to assess him. For President Zelensky, what I can say is this: he has got to be one of the bravest people that I can imagine. I think most people facing the threat of the Russians coming in, and I remember even watching this before I got to Kyiv, and very worried about even everyone's safety there as we remain, especially on areas of the front line fighting. But he stayed and he fought, and he has since rallied his country and also the rest of the international community together with our efforts to support his people's efforts to stay independent and stay free. And it's now been, it's in its 3rd year. It's a long time. It's quite remarkable. I get to meet him a lot because we have a lot of visitors who come, and I really thank the members of Congress, the members of the administration, and others who come. And he's indefatigable, and he's continuing to fight and continuing to do what he can as one in his position would do to save his country and his people.
Well, and what's remarkable is his people. They too, the resilience shown by the Ukrainians, I think we're all kind of in awe of how they've
Well, this is an excellent point, because I think that's one of the things that really strikes me about Ukraine, is that everybody's in the fight. So of course there are the frontline defenders, these people who have mobilized or volunteered to go to the front lines and be in this very, very difficult fight with a better equipped and more people, larger army. And these folks are amazing. But everybody else everyone is doing something. I mean, the teachers are helping in various ways, even outside of what's really important, which is to continue to keep the schools open so that people stay in the country, so that the economy can still work. But every part of society, if you're a singer, you're doing concerts to raise money for the war fighters. If you're, a mom, you're making things that you're selling so that you can raise some bit of money. Like every single person is helping in every way. And the second thing that I think is really remarkable about Ukraine is just the innovation of the culture. And so the reason they have done so well, it's impossible. What they're facing is really literally impossible, if you can imagine. I mean, we sit in Kyiv and we've had thousands of missiles and drones coming at us. It's hard to even explain because it sounds like it's out of some kind of movie or something that you're actually living through every single night. Air alerts that say you've got missiles or drones coming at the city. And this is what these folks have lived through now in its war in its 3rd year. But they're incredibly innovative. So the frontline defenders are using drone technology in war in a way that we don't even use it, in a way that we're actually learning from them that is quite useful for our own efforts to defend our country, and looking at what future wars are likely to look like. And it's very difficult. It's a lot of drone warfare in addition to more traditional warfare. They're also really innovative in things like digitization. So one of the first things when I got to Ukraine that I saw that I thought was just quite remarkable is that everything, pretty much every government service that they have is on their iPhone. Now you would think, oh, that would be a little worrisome with privacy or something like that, but they have figured out a way to keep actually the data secure, and everything they need to do, whether it's register your car, get your driver's license, any kind of government service, they can do on their phone, and they're expanding it. So it means it's very easy. So for those even Ukrainians who are displaced, they can use it to get money to rebuild their apartment or to rebuild their home and to make that application. It's all in the phone. So I would say there are many aspects about Ukrainians that are very remarkable, but also they're the things that would make them a strong partner to us and a strong future potential ally for us.
Well, and we'll save a little time for some questions from the audience as well, but wanted to ask, meanwhile, there's increasing debate here in the U.S. about the level of support we should give Ukraine and whether Ukrainian munitions can be, whether munitions that we supply can be used for Ukrainians to strike into Russia, and about the price tag and whether we can continue to support Ukraine. Those have to be huge thoughts that weigh on both our own diplomats and on the Ukrainians. How do you think about those concerns, and can you help us in our conversations with our neighbors about those questions?
Yeah, so I'm from Grand Rapids, and I know how many billions of dollars that we're giving to Ukraine, and I first want to say it's a significant amount. And as the ambassador in Kyiv, part of my job is to ensure that every cent of that money is accounted for. And I am very, I like to say we're watching it like a hawk, and we are. We have the Office of the Inspector General, and we have all kinds of oversight that's with us in Ukraine to ensure that money is going where we intend it to go. But my second remark would be, I think the question in my mind is, what's the cost if we don't act? To me, that's always the thing. As the longtime person who's worked in the region and seen what Putin does, and this goes to the question of what do we think of Putin? Well, I think Putin's not going to stop. And it's not just because that's sort of the foreign policy consensus. It's because it's also my lived experience that Putin won't stop, that he will continue, and this war will then come to NATO, because after Ukraine is Poland or the Baltic states, which would be more vulnerable. And we then, as a treaty ally of those countries, would have to be physically, meaning our sons and daughters, involved in this fight. My view is that it's very simple. When there's a bully on the playground, you got to punch back, and you got to punch back hard to know that they should not and cannot go on. And I think our collective effort to rally the world, 50 countries, with security assistance, and more money is from the European Union. More Europeans are paying more than we are, but to rally the world and to basically convince Putin that he needs to stop is the only way to stop him. Otherwise, I believe the cost is going to be greater later on, and that's it's something one could debate, but it is my lived experience. I also think, in addition to, I can't even imagine a world where Putin overtakes a country of 40 million people and what that means for our security, for Europe's security, for our security. But I also can't imagine what that means for other would-be aggressors, whether it's China and Taiwan, whether it's other parts of the world. I think it would send the wrong signal. And so it's vitally important, in my view, that this is a strategic failure for Putin, that this full-scale invasion of a country of 40 million people is a failure for him.
Well, and it certainly re-energized NATO. And
Yes.
What's the future of NATO in such a chaotic situation, and should Ukraine become a member?
So it's absolutely re-energized NATO. It's made NATO stronger. The addition of Finland and Sweden is a huge shot in the arm for NATO. We also have seen an exponential increase in NATO members contributing 2%. This is a pledge that was made some years ago, but 2% on defense spending. It's really important. They all need to be there, but they're now we're much closer to that place as a result of Putin's efforts. We have long said that Ukraine's place is in NATO, and they're now undertaking many reforms, democratic reforms, defense sector reforms, to move toward NATO and into NATO, and we're committed to supporting them in that.
And Ukraine, of course, as you mentioned, isn't the only challenge for U.S. diplomacy. We've got Israel with Hamas and Hezbollah, and Sudan's in crisis, and so is Haiti. Our ongoing tensions with China and ever-lurking North Korea. This is a very broad question, but can American diplomacy be effective on so many fronts? I'm curious how the State Department looks at it. Is there a deep bench at the State Department and the talent to be engaged everywhere all at once?
Yes.
We were hoping you'd say that. But it is a testament to the requirements of diplomacy to be.
Yeah. I mean, here's the great thing I've found about being in a place where the stakes are so high, is that you just have to do the job. And in our business and in my business, I mean, we're really careful often in what we do, and because we have to be. We don't want to make a mistake. And that lends itself to being quite risk averse. When I was asked to do this job, I knew it had to be done in a way where we were leaning forward, where I really appreciate Secretary of State and the President supporting me and themselves leaning forward, because I think this is the only way we're going to protect U.S. interests and U.S. values, is if we speak clearly. Luckily, I'm from the Midwest, so I tend to be very direct. And I think this is what is required in this moment. And so can we do this everywhere that it needs to be done? I'm 100% certain that we can and that we must.
Well, and I think it's sometimes easy for us, or a default position, to wonder whether we can have much of a voice in the world and how engaged it makes sense to be in global affairs. Many of our council members have asked how best they can support the Ukrainian people. Do you have any advice for us on that?
Yes, first of all, thank you for being here today. This is one very big thing. I think the Ukrainians feel support just by knowing that we're behind them. I give you just one anecdote of a young woman I met when I was giving a speech in Ukraine, and afterwards she came up to me and she said, this was like 6 months ago, it was right before the $61 billion supplemental was passed. We were all a bit nervous. I flew back to Washington to try to make the case for why it was so important to continue that funding. And she said, Madam Ambassador, my mom, she was young, maybe 18 or 20. She said, my mom and dad and my family are all here, and they're asking me, should we stay? What do you think? Are we going to be okay? And she said, are you going to stay with us? Are you going to stay with us? And I said, obviously, I can't promise the future, but I said, look, we're going to do everything we can to support you and support you and support you and support you and support you. Supporting us is enough for us to keep going. I think that sentiment is actually one that I hear widespread across the country. They know we're not fighting with them. We don't have Americans in the fight with them. But knowing that we support them, especially number one, the United States, but other democratic countries, European countries, is incredibly important. So just this, thank you for being here today and for caring and listening about what's happening and asking questions. I think that's number one, the most important thing. There's also plenty of ways that if you wish to support and donate, you can. I think Oksana Markarova is the ambassador in Washington, D.C., and I think on her website she has a number of, including official places where you could donate if you wish. And those, we can't recommend a particular one, but that would be a reliable place to donate if you wanted to. And also, Grand Rapids is a sister city with Dnipro, which is the most important industrial city in the East, which is frankly under serious risk right now with the fighting that's going on in the East. And Russia is taking bit by bit some of the land, and many people are worried that this is going to head toward Dnipro. So whatever you can do to support that sister city relationship is also very, very helpful. But I thank you for that.
Before we invite more questions, my last one I just have to ask. You're involved in one of the hottest spots in the world, so you're not likely to be thinking about what's next for you. And maybe this is a question for your husband or your son, I don't know. But where do you see your career going? How does that work in the Foreign Service?
Well, when I took this job, and it's the kind of job that I think you have to focus on resolutely without any lack of focus. And I mean, I say this a lot, from the time I open my eyes in the morning until the time I close them at night, I am thinking of all the ways that we can advance our policy, support Ukraine, help them win, defeat the Russians. And I can't think of anything else. For me, it's the singular honor of a lifetime to be asked to do this particular job. And I think it's one where you got to be pulled off the field.
Well, we're proud to have you doing that job, I have to say.
Thank you.
I think we've got just a few minutes, Michael. Welcome some questions.
Sure we did. I've got a microphone here. We've got time for a few questions. So you know the House rules at the World Affairs Council. You ask a question succinctly, so that, and respectfully, of course, so that others can ask a question too. So happy to pass it around. Want to introduce yourself?
Justin Mankfeld. I actually founded the sister city along with Anna from the Ukrainian Society. And so I just want to say thank you for being here. And thank you for everything that you're doing on behalf of Grand Rapids and on behalf of Dnipro as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I love Dnipro.
I think I can project my voice well enough.
No, I'm going to help you.
Thank you. My question goes to your phrase you used a few minutes ago about rallying the rest of the world, and to the question of other parts of the world like Africa and India. A few days ago, I had a house guest who came from France. He was a diplomatic representative from a West African country of Cameroon. And I asked him about Ukraine and what the Cameroonian attitude was. And he surprised me with his answer. He says, basically, the population is supportive of Putin and Russia. And I said, well, why could that possibly be? And he said, because our colonial history makes a lot of people very angry with France, and anything that France is in favor of, we're not in favor of. So I thought, wow, I don't quite get it. So I assume our diplomatic corps is aware of all of this sort of stuff, and how do you react to that kind of comment and rallying the rest of the world?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think that sentiment is quite common, actually, especially in Africa. What the Ukrainians have done is to open up 10 embassies in Africa. So at the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia took over all of the embassies around the world. So some of the periphery states did not have such representation. And I think the Ukrainians have made some good inroads by reaching out directly. And their foreign minister, the previous one and now the current one, is really working to try to reach to African countries, Latin American, South American countries, other countries around the world. I think you have to combat some of this just with data and facts. I mean, the challenge we face with Russia, and here's where, the Russian playbook is on territorial aggression. That is clear in my view. What people maybe who aren't in this field don't know as well or aren't as familiar with is the massive disinformation campaigns that Russia uses to influence populations around the world. And what I think is the most concerning to me, I mean, it's all concerning, but when I was in Slovakia, that is a huge target area for Russia because it's seen as contested space. It's a country that, although a member of the EU and a member of NATO, It's a divided country with about half that look toward Russia and half that look toward the West. And it's remained so, even though it's maintained these memberships in Euro-Atlantic institutions. And what I saw there was just an incredible disinformation campaign against America, against NATO, against our embassy. We had our first ever demonstration against the US Embassy in Slovakia, a NATO country, an EU country, because the US signed a military agreement with the Slovaks. And there were signs outside our embassy saying, like, NATO, go home. It's shocking. These were all paid, funded demonstrations that Russia and other aligned countries are fueling in Europe. And to me, this is so dangerous. And this is actually, maybe I pivot just to education. And here's why I think it's so important that we educate the next generation. It's so hard to get data and factual information in our lives in these days. And I think for young people, especially on social media, it's just rife with incorrect information. And I think the only way we can possibly combat it is with actual factual information. And we as governments have to be faster. I think we're too slow, but it's because we strive to be accurate. We really do try to say and do as far as I've ever, in my experience, I've never been asked to say or do something that's not correct or that's a lie. But I think that's not true for all countries around the world. So I think we've got to focus on education. I think we've got to use data. I think we've got to be faster and smarter about how we combat it. And I think we also have to realize that this is out there in a very massive way and that this is affecting populations. And I think even beyond African populations, European populations, our own population.
Madam Ambassador, thank you so much. Representative Skolton, it was such an honor to play a role in getting the National Security Supplemental to the floor and getting it passed earlier this year.
So it's hugely important.
No. The very least we could do for our ally. What would you have Congress do next?
Thank you. Well, Madam Representative, I invite you to Ukraine, if you can come. I think continuing support, both the political support and such as possible the financial support. So the president has not requested another package of support, and I would assume that would not happen before our election. But I do think that as we look forward, a strong, both politically and assistance-wise, support to Ukraine is helpful to put them in a position where actually President Zelensky can negotiate. And I do think that's something, he's talked about this publicly, like the desire to move toward negotiations. And I think that that's something that would help if there's seen to be strong bipartisan support. I believe we're strongest when our foreign policy is bipartisan. And strong bipartisan support and also commitment to continue economic support going forward. The security assistance we provide so far, about half of it goes back into our own defense industrial base, which we have seen from this war is really not at the level we would want it to be. And so a lot of that money comes back into America to fund American jobs, including in Michigan. So I think that would be the most helpful thing from Congress. And thank you. Thanks for being here.
Anybody? Another question? Hank, you got another one? Oh, there's one way over there. Okay.
Oh. Yes.
Rampant disinformation campaign from Russia targeted to Ukraine. While Ukraine was trying to get into NATO since 1994, indeed was the first nation to start a partnership for peace. So today we see the disinformation campaigns you mentioned in many continents, here in the United States, thank you,
Here in the United States, Ambassador, do you have any specific ideas, whether for the Department of Education, for educators locally? How can we better prepare our students with facts and information of how to digest and distill the truth from the lies? And how do we educate everyone in the United States about information as a weapon intended to undermine our democracy and our democratic resilience? Thank you.
Thanks. That's a great question. I think, I don't know the full answer to this question, but I can say what we do. First of all, know your source. People, it's really important that people know the source of things, and I think that's part of the problem. Sometimes with social media in particular, is that unsourced things can quickly become viral. Secondly, go to many sources of information. I think that we're all served well if we have a variety of sources of information rather than just one. And that can also help kind of check the sources. I mean, I'm sitting next to a former journalist, so maybe there are other thoughts as well. But I think talking about it and acknowledging this as a challenge that is faced in our system, in our democracy these days, I think also is very important. Fact-checking what everybody's telling you, what I'm saying, I think is important. You should, I think it's really a really important thing to use all these critical thinking skills, and why the education piece at all levels is vital, I think, to our young people. Because as they're considering, I know sometimes our time period between information and decision is very short. And so it's really vital to get information that is, you can judge to be accurate before the decision. And I feel that this is one thing to think about, our critical thinking process. What information is going in that's leading to various decisions, and to be aware of that as a real threat to our ability to make good decisions. And I'm very mindful, because I tell my team, we're working at the speed of war. I really push them to move fast. And it's a little bit of a rallying cry now for all of my team, because it's not usual in government to have to work as fast as we work. And we're dealing with a lot of money. We're dealing with high stakes foreign policy. We're dealing with a media environment where we also could trip up. But we gotta keep making good decisions. I think it's a challenge. So I think those few things, plus probably other people have other ideas, is a part of getting at this problem.
I think we've got time for one last question.
Yeah, we got one more right here.
Yes. Thank you, Michael. Jason Duncan, Aquinas College. Thank you for your courageous service in Kyiv and Ukraine. I'm sure everybody in this room wants this brutal and unjust war to come to an end as soon as possible, with Russia out be the best outcome, obviously. But what's the diplomatic framework, if there is one, for the end of the war? At some point it's going to end. And I wonder, I know you can't negotiate in public, that wouldn't be wise, but I wonder what, in general terms, you thought might be the best possible outcome at this point. Thank you.
Well, what President Biden has always said is that President Zelensky will determine the end of the war, that we will leave up to him when and how to begin negotiations. And so we have not pressed him to start negotiations or given some kind of framework for what that might look like. What we are doing is trying to help him be as strong as possible so he can be in a position to go into negotiations with Putin. I don't know when that might be, but I do think this effort to show strength to Putin is the recipe to helping Putin realize that he also needs to end this war. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us today. Michael?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being with us today. I'm Michael Vandenberg. I'm the Executive Director of the World Affairs Council of Western Michigan. Special thanks and congratulations to Ambassador Brink. And we're thinking about you, we're praying for you and your staff, and we wish you all the best on our behalf. Thank you. You can always count on your hometown. Just want you to remember that, right? And thank you again to the Meyer Foundation, to Amway, to Bank of America, all of our corporate and educational sponsors and partners. We appreciate you deeply. Thank you so much for being here and being interested in the world. If you're not one of our 40 corporate and civic members, one of our 10 university members, I encourage you to join us, and you can find out how to do that at worldmichigan.org. In these tumultuous times in our country and in our world, I close with the verse from Scripture that Ambassador Brink's predecessor, Marie Yovanovitch, used in the epigraph of her book, Lessons from the Edge. And it comes from 1 Corinthians 13. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. Have a great afternoon. Thank you for being here.